Greetings from inside my own little personal cocoon. I have been a student of astrology for many, many years now, and it has really helped me to gain a deeper understanding of myself and the world around me, and just my own nature in relation to it and to other people. And I've been asked for a really long time to write a blog or do a podcast or chart readings, people for a really long time. And I've been resistant to it, but I've had an ample amount of time over the last few weeks to go down every astrological rabbit hole possible. So I'm pretty much just like overflowing with all of these insights and information. So I kind of don't have a choice anymore. So here I am. And I hope that you will find something to take away from it that will help you understand the astrological weather conditions a little bit better and your place in it. And I just want to start by talking about what astrology actually is. And we've sort of turned it into a bit of a parlor game. You know, we read our horoscopes online or in magazines or whatever, and it's so much more than that. And one thing that I hate that people think astrology, it's not a fortune telling tool. Astrology is the keeper of cycles and archives, and it can be the architect of time. We can think of it like that. And it's not here to tell us what will happen. It doesn't speak in absolutes because we have free will. So we are ultimately responsible for how we express this energy. And it can help us identify and trace and connect cycles, but it is not the captain of the spaceship. That is us, you and me and us together as a collective. And an astrological pattern is meant to be a guide to show us how the tides are flowing at any particular time. And right now we have some pretty intense energy. An astrological age lasts about 2,000 years. And we're coming out of the Piscean age, so the age of Pisces, into the age of Aquarius. And there's been a lot of debate about when the age of Aquarius actually started. The Mayans, some people are of the school of thought that it started December 21st, 2012, I think. I am of the mind that we are kind of at the apex. We're at the tipping point now, and we're really moving into this new astrological age. So there is a big purge happening. And I know for myself, like all of my sort of belief system, outdated belief systems, things I feel about myself, old habits, patterns, stuff that I've been resistant to look at and change are really starting to come to the surface. So I definitely feel that and have been feeling that for a really long time. And I spoke about this at a talk that I did back in July. I have been feeling like I'm just, the structures that I've created, my personality, my belief systems are just starting to sort of dissolve. I've been calling it gooping. And it's kind of like when a caterpillar is in the chrysalis phase and it's going to turn into a butterfly, it really just melts into primordial goop. And we are gooping. Now, months later, I'm looking around and we are literally all in our cocoons, just kind of dissolving. It's really interesting to see it kind of actually happening in the collective. It's not just my personal experience anymore. So the way that I'm perceiving an astrological age, which is 2,000 years, is working a bit like dog years. So one astrological age would be like one grade or one step in the process of human evolution. And I'm going to talk about Jesus Christ a bit throughout this video. And I want to make it clear that I am relating to this idea as a consciousness, Christ consciousness. So it is a state that we can embody. And Jesus Christ himself, I will express that as if he is an avatar of this grade or this step in human evolution. So he's the avatar, the figure, the symbol that we look to for understanding, like a teacher or a guide. A prophet is somebody who reads the signs of the time. So to me, the avatar of Jesus Christ, he was a prophet reading the signs of the times. And he taught in parables or stories or myth. And myths are not fairy tales. They're these rich, symbolic stories. And if you really go into them and sit with them and experience them and read between the lines, there's the mysteries of life, and there's this thread of truth that runs through them, and they're so beautiful. And this is one of the things that has, I think, gotten a little bit lost, like the mind of a mystic. In the last couple of decades, we've been really focused on, collecting data and just raw information, which is beautiful and beneficial in its way too. So there's these two aspects. So we have like the myth and the story and the parable, and kind of like the art and the soul of how we understand things. And then we have the Aquarian age, which is the age of information. So Pisces is a water sign, Aquarius is an air sign. So we're moving from water to air. So we're kind of in this place where we're just sort of flapping around like fish out of water. And there is an integration that needs to take place. Information, raw data, information, innovation, technology, all of these things. And then the soul and the mystery and the heart that goes into the myths and the stories and the parables of humanity. And now we're taking like the old and merging it into the new. And it's really important that we come to a place where we can appreciate these different schools of thought, because they all arrive at the same place. And it is a great gift to be able to, I guess what I'm trying to say is you can be a mystic and a scientist. and that, I think, is a touchstone of coming into the next 2,000 years, is finding a way to integrate these two things together. So I want to touch on that right there and just go into a little bit of the mechanics of how you could interpret planetary motion. The planets are like the actors. So it's what is being expressed. It's the vehicle, the what. And then the signs, the 12 signs, are like the characters. So it's the how. And what I was just talking about before, about the integration of, the mystic and the scientist, is also happening in the evolution of how we perceive or how we interpret the cosmic weather. So over the last 2,000 years, back, in the ancient times, before they had the science and the equipment that we have to really, really like look into the alchemical processes, the ancients, they didn't have any of those things. So they used myth and archetypal story to try to describe these alchemical processes. So I'm going to use Venus and Mars as an example of this. So Venus, they say, how they say men are from Mars, women are from Venus. Venus, the archetype of Venus, is the goddess Aphrodite. And she represents the goddess, femininity, beauty, the values that that feminine energy encompasses, fertility, And then there's Mars, and Mars, the archetype of Mars, is the god of war. So that's energy being explained as from the masculine perspective of, being forceful, linear, aggressive, moving forward. So that's like the archetype. But then if we really get into the alchemical processes, so we can break it down really small and we can get a little bit more scientific. So copper would be the metal or the element that is associated with Venus. And if you think about how the qualities of copper is, it's aesthetically pleasing, it's receptive, it's malleable, it's feminine, it's describing all of these feminine qualities. And the element or the metal associated with Mars would be iron. And if we think about the qualities of iron, it's magnetic, it's forceful, we make things out of it. It's describing masculine energy. So we can break this down into these chemical processes that are kind of happening above us. And when we're born, our astrological natal chart is a snapshot of what was happening in the sky at the exact moment that we were born. So we can think of ourselves or our bodies as these kind of alchemical containers, and we have these different levels or mixes of these chemicals that are interacting with each other. And then when we're in relationship with each other, we have, another container full of these different combinations of how these elements are interacting. And then that relationship then becomes a container and those elements are interacting. So we can go there, we can break it down that small, or we can look at the archetypal myth. So let's start with, we're going to go into, so we have some heavy hitters that are affecting us right now. So let's start with Saturn. So Saturn is the professor or the big papa disciplinarian of the zodiac. So Saturn deals with kind of those heavier energies that aren't necessarily like fun, that we might not want to deal with. So time, discipline, structure. If you think of the actual physical planet, Saturn, you can see the rings around it representing limitations and restriction. And then we can look at Jupiter, and Jupiter is the opposite of expression of Saturn. So Jupiter is, they thought of Jupiter as a very regal planet. It's a planet of luck and expansion and good fortune. So it would represent like your best possible life, all of your dreams. So if Jupiter represents your perfect life, all of your dreams that you want to live and experience exist as that island over there, then Saturn would be what you have to do, the steps that you have to take within the restriction or the limitations of time, what you would have to do to build the boat to get to the island of your dreams. So it's the, we can dream and go off in la la land and think about being over there, but Saturn represents the actual physical representation or the manifestation of realizing the dream that Jupiter represents. So it's discipline. And the word discipline, the root of it actually means to be a disciple of. So to have discipline is being a disciple to your dream, to the manifestation of what you want to experience. So even though the energy is really heavy and it's not like super fun to navigate sometimes, ultimately the true lesson or the goal of Saturn is to get us to a place where we're disciplined enough to manifest and realize those dreams. So those are those two guys. And then we have Pluto. So Pluto represents transformation. It's death and rebirth. It's the smallest planet, right? So it's energy that you can't necessarily see, but it's working in our depths, like way down in the depths. Pluto would represent like Hades in the underworld. It represents the lowest part of ourselves and the highest part of ourselves, and what would have to happen to get from here to there. And it also represents less mystical things, like, not that it's not mystical, but death. Pluto rules the house of actual physical death and disease. And when we deal with this energy, it's always, if you pay attention, if you listen, it's always kind of rumbling, but we don't often listen to it. And when we keep going through these motions and we refuse to pay attention to the transformation that Pluto is suggesting that we make, that energy, then it's going to come out as more of an explosion or something unpleasant. And all of the energies are neutral. There's no good or bad. There's just a polarity. So there's always a positive and a negative expression of them. So the signs, for instance, I'm an Aries. So Aries people can be impulsive. It's a fire sign. So it's impulsive. We often tend to, on the negative expression, not always think things through. The Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. So it represents leading somewhere. Like an Aries person might be considered a natural born leader. That would be the positive expression of Aries, would be like a compassionate leader that's tuned into the needs of the flock or of the collective. The negative expression of that Aries energy would be like to be overpowering, controlling. A keyword is bossy. So we can express those things in two ways, and it's our choice, and it's neither good or bad. I've looked at Hitler and Gandhi have similar aspects in their natal charts that would indicate the gift or the ability to persuade. Now you can see that pretty clearly, the different manifestations of that energy. Hitler definitely used it to persuade and control, and look how that turned out. And then there was Gandhi, who expressed it in a completely different way and did, wonderful, beautiful things. He transformed, and Hitler expressed it as persuading people to, express it in the negative way. And it's always our choice. Pluto, so all the planets are also moving on different cycles, different time. So Pluto moves around the zodiac over 247 years. So it's a really slow moving planet, and it affects the collective unconscious of a generation as it moves through the signs. Whereas Saturn and Jupiter, that they're also transpersonal planets, but we can kind of look at them in a more personal way, how they're affecting our lives. But Pluto is really like the collective. It will affect us personally too, but its real energy is really focused on the transformation of the zeitgeist of the collective or of a generation. Saturn takes about 29 years to circle the zodiac. And you may have heard about this phenomenon. So when Saturn gets back to the exact place it was when you were born, that's called your Saturn return. And there's, that kind of like little crisis that happens sort of before you turn 30. We can blame Professor Saturn for that. And basically, when you get to be that age, so around 28 years old, if you're not aligned with your nature, with your core, and the activities and the way that you're living your life and the choices that you're making are not the best, highest expression of that core energy, Saturn's gonna fuck shit up for you. And that's actually, my Saturn return was absolutely horrible. And that's how I got into astrology in the first place, was I kind of hit this real bottom place, and I didn't have anywhere else to look but up. And it's just kind of the top blew off of my own consciousness, and I was able to become aware of all of these subtler energies, and I developed a relationship with the energy of Saturn and how it was moving through my life and what it was trying to teach me. And I have never been one for structure. Anyone who knows me, I'm just kind of a fly by the seat of my pants kind of person. So Saturn energy is not super easy for me with my constitution and my nature to be able to deal with it super well. And I'm sure you all have your own Saturn return stories. So we usually go through 2 or 3 of those in our lifetime. And Jupiter takes it spends a year in each sign. So it circles the zodiac in about 12 years. And we have right now an interplay of these 3 planets in the sign of Capricorn. So Capricorn rules structure. In medical astrology, it would rule the bones or the skeleton of the body. So it's like a container structure. And we have what we call a stellium. So it's these planets all kind of bunched together in this sign, and they're moving around and interacting with each other over the course of 2020. So this all started back in January. We had a conjunction. So a conjunction is an aspect in astrology. So it's how the planets are relating to each other. And it describes sort of the shapes they're making in the sky. So a conjunction is when 2 planets meet and their energy one energy from one planet makes the other energy of the other planet stronger. So they're kind of helping each other bring out their qualities that they encompass. So back on January 12th, we had a conjunction of Pluto and Saturn. I have been following this for years, and as most people who study astrology, knowing that it was going to be a big thing, but not knowing how we were going to choose or how it was going to express itself. So if you think about what we know about Saturn so far, it's would represent a structure. Pluto is going to represent a transformation or a kind of a death or a rebirth. And 2 more words that we can use for what Pluto would do, how that energy might be expressed, would be to integrate or to disintegrate. So it can be this beautiful high transformational energy, or it can be really destructive. So what we're seeing now in its wake is the disintegration or the dissolving or the death, transformation, there's Pluto, of structure. There's Saturn. And we can see this everywhere. Everything is dissolving. All structures that are not aligned with the energy of the Aquarian age, which is transparency, it is equality, it is innovation, it is the freedom. Freedom is a big word. Freedom to be, to express your nature, the core of who you are, your uniqueness, the freedom to embody that at all times, to be within the bigger collective story. So it's the freedom to express yourself, to give the gifts that you were meant to give in the whole ecosystem of humanity. So Aquarian energy is really about moving from me to we. The question is, how will your unique expression, your individuality, the core of who you are, how will that serve the whole? So in the last age, in the Piscean age, it was about taking our gifts and kind of like hoarding them away things were sort of kept secret. Even the great mystic teachings and the yogic teachings in that time were passed down from master to student. They weren't available for everyone. In the age of Aquarius, it's about transparency. It's everything is available to everyone. And you can see like everything beginning to purge, to come into this new frequency. It started a few years ago with the Me Too movement and all this hidden, repressed information coming out of the shadows into the light. That is a good example of this purge that we're having. And I don't really want to. I'm not going to get political, but the way that I've been perceiving Donald Trump being elected to president is he's playing his role kind of perfectly, because he represents, it's a reflection. He's showing us all of this kind of shadow material, this sort of, stuff in the subconscious that that this nation has been built on. The inequality, the racism, like all of this through history, through the ages. He kind of like embodies that and isn't shy about it. Like, the one good thing is that he might lie a lot, but he's doing it right out in the open for all of us to see. Nothing is kind of being like kept underneath it. It's all coming up to be purged. You can look back. The last Saturn and Pluto conjunction happened in 1982, which is actually the year I was born. So 1982 natives are really going to feel this on a personal level, this purge and this kind of just this complete restructuring of our belief systems. And if you look at what happened in 1982, we were coming out of this global recession, and the conjunction kind of just redrew the economic landscape. We had the Reagan and the Thatcher trickle up economics, and that ultimately ended up redistributing the world's wealth to the 1%. So that was a restructuring, and now obviously we've reached a tipping point of how we're experiencing that conjunction, because it's the 1%, like there's no equality in how the global wealth, how our economics is working. So there will be a big correction of that. A good example of how that conjunction began to work now, the first thing that happened that personally affected me and my own structure, my belief structures, was within my yoga community. The guru, Yogi Bhajan, or the man who brought this practice over from India to the West in the 60s, was basically, he was pretty badly Me Too'd, and it caused a really major rift in the existing structure of the organization. And this is another shift that will happen coming into the Aquarian age, is the idea that anyone outside of you can tell you what to do or knows more than you. And I've been reflecting a lot about that sort of cult mentality and what makes us follow as human beings, how we've become disconnected from our own intuition, and how we've lost our own unique and individual connection to source. And I'll go back and I'm going to talk about the avatar of Christ for a second. That avatar, that symbol, that representation of that type of that Christ consciousness could connect directly to source, could connect to get his messages directly from source. And then he tried to translate that direct message by using myth and parable to relay it to other people. What ended up happening, I like to use the example of like a carrot growing. It will get its energy directly from source, so directly from the sun. We can't do that yet as human beings, so we have that energy once removed through what we eat out of the ground, so through the carrot. And then we get into sort of how we process food, nutrition. We can also look at how we process information in that way also. When we eat, it's just information that's being translated by our body, and it's processing it into output, so into the energy that we're expending, but it's ultimately just information. And the information that we absorb through our system by our brains, what we read, our ideas, our belief systems, what other people tell us, it can be very nutritious or it can be really not nutritious and empty. So Jesus would teach with stories and parables that got passed down. So it goes through, it's like the game of telephone. It kind of goes through all of these different filters. And sometimes when that happens, when you get that information, it would be like taking a vegetable and then just processing it and running it through all of these symptoms. By the time it's on your plate, it just doesn't have any of the nutrients or the original information that it had before. So what happened with Christ's message is it was passed down went through all these different processing systems. And, the church took it up and turned the original information into something that isn't really very nutritious, if that makes sense. We don't need the middleman anymore. We don't need the carrot, so to speak, especially now because the energy is so much less dense. It's so much less heavy. It's transparent. We're in an air sign. So we don't need the gurus. We don't need the middleman, the avatar, because you, me, us as unique individuals, we have to become our own avatar, because this energy, this Christ consciousness, is now fully available for all of us to encompass. And that takes all of the nutritious qualities from the Piscean age, all of the things that feed us and that are based in equality and in compassion and in understanding that the other person is you, that we are all connected. Everything that you do affects everyone and everything around you. And the information and the gifts that you have, when you connect directly to source, you are meant to give to the whole that will inspire other people to connect to source themselves. And this is also how astrology is evolving. I understand astrology because I have my own personal relationship with these planets and with these energies, and I understand how they work and affect me on a personal level in my life. And then in mundane astrology, I can see how that is then how I'm affecting, or how it is affecting the whole and my place in it. And this brings me to the next major planetary interplay between those heavy hitters in Capricorn. So, and this is actually the energy that we're dealing with right now. So today, actually, probably like, what time is it? Yeah, so like right now, Pluto and Jupiter are conjuncting. So in January, we had Pluto and Saturn, and now we're dealing with the Jupiter and Pluto conjunction. And this is the first of a cycle of 3. So this is the first time that these two planets are exact in their conjunction. Today is April 4th, and then these dates written down. So it happens 2 more times. So June 30th and November 12th. So this is long-term energy. And this is really interesting how Jupiter and Pluto are interacting. We talked about before Pluto being the unseen. So it's the smallest planet. So the unseen. And Jupiter will magnify anything it touches. So it doesn't care. It's a neutral energy, so it's not going to care what it is that it's expanding or magnifying. It's just going to do it. So that can express itself in a positive way or in a negative way. So for instance, like a cancer, a tumor, Jupiter would expand it. It would grow it. And we can actually see this happening. So this same conjunction between Jupiter and Pluto also occurred in 1918 during the Spanish flu. So the last, we had the Hong Kong flu after that. But during both of those epidemics, Jupiter and Pluto were dancing together in the sky. And we're seeing that again now with the coronavirus. And I also, you can see how this energy was working. I'm going to talk about the dissolution of the organization that ran Kundalini Yoga, which is the yoga that I practiced. A woman wrote a book about her experiences with Yogi Bhajan, and this information, this was not new information. This was available if you knew what to look for online already. The story, I think there was a lawsuit back in the 90s, and you could look it up. The information was available, but only if you knew what to look for or if you were looking for it. Now she's written this book and released it, and because of the influence of Jupiter and Pluto, it just took off. It just spread. And caused the dissolving or the disintegration of the whole organization. How this energy could also possibly work on a personal level is Pluto kind of represents a zoning in, so it's a one-pointed focus. So we could use the word obsession. And then we have Jupiter that's going to expand that. So something to watch over the next little while is your mind and where it goes and how it interprets this energy. So if you're going to fixate on something or have an obsession about something, under this influence, it's very possible that something is going to expand and become larger than life. And I'll use an example from my own personal life. A couple days ago, I was looking at the 8th house, that represents death. It's ruled by Scorpio, so Pluto has a hand in the 8th house. And I noticed something about my own personal chart, having to relating with maybe when I'm going to die or leave this earth plane. And I just one-pointed focused on this one thing and spun on that, and it became this obsession. And I realized what I was doing, and I was like, okay, so this is not the thing that I want to expand. I need to focus on something else. So if you understand how that energy is working in your system, you can shift it, if that makes sense. What's really interesting too about this one transit is if you go back over hundreds of years, you can see when there is a Pluto-Jupiter conjunction, there was a development in the manifestation or the invention of the microscope, which is a perfect example of small things becoming bigger. And then in terms of the virus, this is spreading at a exponential level. Pluto would represent disease and Jupiter would represent the magnification or the expansion of that. So it's a perfect energy for a pandemic. And when I was reflecting, kind of thinking on maybe I knew following these conjunctions and these planets in Capricorn, I knew that something was going to have to occur that was going to affect society at every level. to dissolve these structures that are not in Aquarian frequency. And I was like, oh, I hope it's not like a war. And the word virus did cross my mind, but it was more like technological warfare kind of thing, like hacking into computer systems and like a shutdown of our economic system on that level. This is actually pretty poetic in the sense that it is doing just that. It has completely shut down our entire economy. It's affecting every structure, every system. It's not discriminating. It affects everyone. It does not care about borders. It's an Aquarian virus. And another interesting thing, which is just a thought that I had, was that the word corona means crown in Spanish. And when a woman is in labor having a baby, she crowns. So we can look at this as something that's aiding in our transformation, that's helping sort of contract us or push us through the birth canal into this new stage of our evolutionary process as human beings. So definitely be aware of how you are expressing that in your own life. And it's, like I said, this is not a short-term aspect. This is a long-term aspect. It's going to be with us right until the end of 2020. Which then brings us to what we will refer to as the Great Conjunction. And that is between Jupiter and Saturn. These two planets have their conjunction. They work in cycles where they meet every 20 years. So they spend about 200 years in signs that have the same element. So the last 200 years, they've conjuncted all in earth signs. So Capricorn is an earth sign. So this is going to be the last one. And then they're going to be conjuncting for the next 200 years in air signs. So this is the end of their cycle, which is another indication to me that this is the end of this Piscean age and the gateway into the age of Aquarius. We're really on the precipice of this new era. And I'm going to be very curious to see how that plays out. So we're really at a point. I've been reflecting a lot about, if you were like me, like a kid in the 80s and 90s, you probably remember the movie The Never-Ending Story. There's also a book that I haven't read that's supposed to be a lot better. And the author of that book, I thought this was funny. The author of that book, his name is Michael Ende, and in German, Ende means end. So he wrote The Never-Ending Story, and his last name like literally means end. But, when I was a kid, it was just cool because it was, there was a big puppet luck dragon thing, and it was just this fantastical thing, and I just loved it. And I watched that again a couple years ago as an adult and realized that the symbolism and the message is actually really quite profound. And kind of a short synopsis of the plot is there's this fantastical world called Fantasia that's being destroyed by this phenomenon called the nothing. So it's just taking everything and squashing it. And there's no more story. And Fantasia is built on the dreams of humans. So they're building this world with their dreams and their wishes and their desires. And the nothing is taking over because the people of Earth have stopped dreaming and they've stopped writing the story. And you'll have to watch the movie, but it really, to me, is symbolic of the journey of the soul. It's the journey of initiation. And we're at that place right now where the symbol, it's an ancient symbol on the front cover of this book, is the Ouroboros. So it's the snake eating its tail. So it's this cycle, right? And I feel, and maybe you can relate to this, but I feel right at that point where the tail meets, where it's about to eat its tail and kind of go around again, there's this suspension. And we can kind of like go around the same circle, or we can break through the outer structure of it. So the corona is also the outer, like the glowing, like the corona around the moon, the boundary around the moon, the glowing. Or if we think of a cell in the body, it's going to have the cellulose. So it's the thing that keeps it contained. But we have to sort of penetrate that now, because we're either going to go around again, or we're at this suspension where we have this choice where we can kind of break through and create this other circle. And the only way that we're going to be able to do that is if we can reimagine the world that we live in. This is an amazing time to be alive. It's so exciting because we have the freedom in the age of Aquarius to really rewrite the destiny of humanity. The stories, they need an upgrade. They're important. The myth, the stories we tell, what we relate to, but they need an upgrade. We need new ones. We need new ones, and we need to integrate those stories, the heart, the art, the music of who we are as people, with science and with information. So we need to reimagine the structures of our world into newer structures that support the good of the whole. And there is a couple other things to look out for over the next couple of months. So the first thing is Venus. So as I was saying before, Venus is going to represent your value systems and the things that you are willing to sacrifice in your life to uphold and maintain those values. So those values need to be aligned in this energy too, obviously. So today, Venus just moved into Gemini. So Gemini is about the mind. It's about information. It's about the innovation of ideas. It's ruled by Mercury. And Mercury, of course, is liquid and solid at the same time. So there's a flow. And I'm sure you've all heard about or experienced the phenomenon of Mercury retrograde. So Mercury retrogrades happen frequently. So it's one that we're quite familiar with. It happens 3 or 4 times a year. And when a planet goes retrograde, it's the illusion that the planet is moving backwards. The planet isn't actually moving backwards, but the energy that expresses is it slows down the expression of that planet. So it kind of sort of puts the brakes on. So when Mercury goes retrograde, Mercury deals with communication. So it wants us to slow down and reorganize the ways in which we are communicating. So if you know how you communicate during a Mercury retrograde and you say something and then the other person hears something different and there's this miscommunication and then it kind of leads to whatever it leads to. It's because it kind of creates this phenomenon of speaking through water. So when you talk to someone, it's going through this water and it's getting distorted, and then they're going to hear it in a different way, and then it might cause a conflict, but those conflicts are there so that we, sort of wake up and pay attention to how we are communicating. So that happens frequently. Venus only goes retrograde maybe once every 2.5 years, so it happens rarely. And I'm going to circle back to the whole Christ consciousness, Jesus avatar thing, and how sort of astrology plays into the story that the Bible tells. I noticed the last time Venus was retrograde, it could have been the last time, or maybe it was the time before that, it coincided with the 40 days of Lent. So Lent is the 40 days leading up to Easter. Venus retrogrades are always around 40 days. Also, the way that Venus has an 8-year cycle, and during its movement during those 8 years, it will make a 5-pointed star. That's the shape of the pattern that it's making with its movement. So Venus rises in the day and the night. So it's the evening star and the morning star, depending on where it is in its cycle. And Lucifer, the word Lucifer, it's a Latin word that actually means light bringer. So the ancient people saw the movement of Venus, and they thought of it as when it was moving down in its formation, it was going down into the underworld. So, and then bringing the light back up. So descending down into Hades and then coming back and bringing illumination with it. And it would become, the morning star. So if we think about the story of Jesus in the desert with the devil, with Lucifer, for 40 days before Easter, he's being tempted by the devil. So like I said, if Venus is representing your values, it would also represent what you would need to sacrifice to uphold those values. So the temptation, the sacrifice, the temptation that Jesus was faced with in his earthly life, he could not be tempted by those things because they did not align with the values that he held in his heart. So there's an interesting little parallel there. So I kind of, that's got my attention, started to pay attention to that. So Venus is going to go retrograde in Gemini. So it's asking us to reevaluate what we value, our ideas, our belief systems, the words that we use, things like that. And that's I think pretty important. And Gemini is also an air sign, so we have a lot of air. So we're kind of moving from these like really heavy earthbound sort of planetary influence for the last little while, which can feel really heavy, and we're moving into a much lighter, airy energy. The next thing to look out for is going to be the shift of the north node of the moon from Cancer also into Gemini. So the north node of the moon, it's the shifting intersection between the Earth orbit and the orbit of the moon, and it represents what we are becoming in this incarnation. So this happens on a personal level too in your natal chart, and now on the collective. So it's like a shifting of the collective zeitgeist into like a new mode of perceiving. So if the north node represents sort of your destiny, where you're going, the south node would represent your comfort zone. So it's where you've already been. It's things you've already worked on that you've mastered that now need an upgrade. They need to be integrated into this new energy. And we tend to kind of hang out in our south nodes because it's familiar. We say, human beings, we say we want change, but we need to be pushed to our limits in order to really make the change. So we kind of sit in our comfort zone, and we're coming out of about a year and a half of the north node being in Cancer, which means that the south node is in its opposite sign of Capricorn. And this axis in astrology represents the polarity of masculine and feminine energy. Oh, my battery's It's going to represent the polarity of masculine and feminine energy. So a south node in Capricorn we've already as a collective mastered that the masculine energy of linear thinking, of achievement, of not honoring the qualities of the feminine. It's just worried about getting ahead and doing more. And whereas the Cancer energy, the mother energy, is more based in the feminine qualities of teaching by nurturing, by taking care of each other. So now we're moving out of the north node in Cancer into Gemini, and we're kind of being tested. We're being asked to apply the things that we're meant to be incorporating into our experience while the north node has been in Cancer. So how can we nurture each other through these trying times? There's an interesting paradox as we're being asked to come together in solidarity by staying apart. So there's an interesting play here of how you can interpret or examine how it is you're encompassing these feminine energies. This is going to occur, the node is going to move on May 5th, which obviously is Cinco de Mayo. And it's going to be interesting to see. So that is a real turning point for the collective in our ideology and in our belief systems. And I anticipate there will be some kind of turning point or change or transition in how we are interacting or reacting, or just how we're relating to the phenomenon of this pandemic and this virus in our lives. And I just think it's really funny that it's on Cinco de Mayo with the Corona and Mexican beer. So I have my eye on that. That's pretty poetic. And now this kind of brings me to the part that I'm most excited to talk about, because these are just sort of new realizations for me, and it's kind of all sort of bringing all these things together. And we're going back to the whole Christ consciousness phenomenon here, and Jesus is the avatar in the Piscean age. And how he may have used the stories and symbolism to explain the evolution of humanity and what he was and what that energy was and what it all represented. So I have to read you something. This is from the Gospel of Luke. This is Luke 22, verse 10. And he said to them, "Behold, as you go into the city, there shall meet you a man carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him into the house where he entereth in." Well, the glyph of Aquarius, the archetype of Aquarius, is the water bearer. So it's a man in the sky. The image is a man in the sky with a pitcher of water, and we're following him into his house. So I thought, oh my goodness, was he talking about the shift into this age? And the water bearer is taking this pitcher of water and dumping it. So all of the water, all of the liquids from the last age, so everything that we've accumulated and placed into this container, the waters of the Piscean age, it's being poured out over all the structure that we've manifested to help in this dissolving. So we're pouring it out, so we have this empty container. The water is gone, and we fill it with these new ideas and the innovation of the North Node in Gemini and the age moving into the frequency of Aquarian energies. And he goes on. He said to the 12 disciples, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have enjoined you. And behold, I'm with you all the days until the completion of the age. So we're at the completion of the age. It's very interesting. And I'm putting this together with the whole symbolism of the 40 days of Venus and Jesus's 40 days in the desert. And I'm thinking about Easter. And so I went back and I looked at some passages that were talking about when Jesus was born. And one of them says, "And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars." So there's more. There's the luminaries and some allusion to planets. So I thought about it. A woman clothed with the sun and the moon at her feet. The Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus Christ. We can possibly connect the archetype of the constellation of Virgo. Virgo is the virgin or the maiden, and she's holding her wheat. She's in a wheat field, and she's, making, like, at the harvest. It happens in fall. The constellation, the sun is in Virgo in the fall, so it represents the harvest, the making and the sharing of bread. Bethlehem, actually means the house of rising bread. The Virgin, the constellation in the sky, the woman is clothed with the sun. It would imply that the sun is moving over. The sun doesn't actually move, but the light of the sun appears as if it's moving over the constellation of Virgo. So the sun, S-U-N, is our physical sun. The Son, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, S-O-N. And you can see, so Virgo's here and Libra's beside it. So the motion of that light clothing that woman in the sky would be the sun moving down almost between the legs of the virgin, of the maiden, into the constellation of Libra. The moon at her feet would imply that it was a new moon in the sign of Libra. And the crown at her head, with the crown of 12 stars, that's kind of where I hit a wall, because I was like, okay, how do I interpret that? Because there's not 12 planets. And I remembered that Jupiter has 12 moons, and Jupiter was a lucky planet. It was a royal regal planet, and they used to think of Jupiter as the king. So this whole image implies that the sun is moving through Virgo and being delivered into Libra, with a new moon at the feet of the Virgin Virgo, with the crown Jupiter at the head of the constellation. So somebody with the right software could plug in, when was Jupiter in Virgo? When was the moon new in Libra? And it seems to me as if it's possible that Jesus was actually born, or that energy, that Christ consciousness was born from the heavens, literally from the heavens, to be available to us at the fall equinox. If you think about what the avatar of Jesus actually taught, it was Libra represents harmony, represents balance. It's the scales, it's justice, it's the balance of light and dark, just like it would be on the actual equinox. And then it gets very interesting. Easter always falls on the first full moon after the vernal spring equinox. That is how we determine when Easter is every year. So when the moon is new in a sign, so we know the moon goes through a 28-day cycle, and it stays 2 to 2.5 days in each sign throughout its cycle. So if we reflect on the moon as the feminine luminary, it embodies feminine qualities as well, in the fact that it can take light from the sun, so it receives it, and it also reflects it and gives it back. And we can base our manifestation on the cycles of the moon, in the sense that it helps us digest information. You can't eat an apple whole. You can't swallow it. You have to take one bite at a time. So we can think of the moon like that. If we have a thought or an idea or something that begins at the beginning of a lunar cycle, that, just like the light of the moon, it's one bite at a time, and our understanding is going to grow along with the light of the moon. And when the moon reaches its fullest expression, so when it becomes a full moon at the end of that lunar cycle, there's usually some kind of a realization and a release of, or what was started on the new moon. So any new moon in a sign will reach its fullest expression. So we'll reach the cycle where it becomes a full moon 6 months later in the same sign. So a new moon in Libra in the fall, in September, would coincide a half a year later with the full moon in Libra in the spring after Easter. So it just all kind of connects in my head with Easter and Jesus rising and the house of rising bread and all of these things, and Lent and being in the desert with the devil and Venus having 40-day retrogrades. And I'm just like, wow, it really tells, it's like a symbolic map of how this energy is moving, this consciousness, this Christ consciousness. And it is Easter next week, and we have our full moon, the full expression of the moon in Libra on the 7th. And we're right at the tipping point, the gateway of coming into this age. And I feel like that the crucifixion of Jesus, in a way, that's that's Pluto material, that transformational energy. It's like on a symbolic level, or as a metaphor, it's like the crucifixion of the personality. It's a crucifixion. It's a transformation of the old way of being, where the personality was really kind of just focused on self-preservation. There's a release of that, and a rising of the real self, or the core, your spiritual self, who you really are on a soul level, can rise, and we can serve the whole through the real self. So there's a death of an old way of being that could have been represented by the crucifixion of Christ, and a coming into the embodiment of the living Christ, so Christ consciousness, and coming into this Aquarian age. It's just very exciting. We have this moon full, and I really feel like for the first time in the last 2,000 years, the embodiment of this energy is just available. It's never been so easy to integrate it into your value system, to just really to be it. And in the Catholic Church, they call this the living Christ. And that's what it means to me. And that is part of the evolution of humanity into the age of Aquarius, is finally we're cutting the middleman out. And it's the same with astrology. It's all well and good to listen to this or to read articles about what's going on. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's once removed, right? Or however many times it's removed, however many filters it goes through. I call this phenomenon learning backwards. And the reason why I love my personal connection with the archetypes of the signs and the planets is that I have these realizations. I have a relationship with them, and I communicate with them, and I learn things. It comes from, as within, so without. It's just all a reflection. So it's coming from me, right? And then I'll go out and I'll find maybe other people who have written about it, or have experienced the same thing. And I'll learn a language, or a way to expand on what I already have realized. So there's no really, like, it's true to me, and no one can take it away from me, because it has been a part of my experience. It's no longer just this concept. And I encourage you, if you have an interest in understanding the energies of the cosmos, to really cut out the middleman, or start there, but really make an effort to try to understand and how these energies are working within you and in your own life, and to really develop a relationship with the planets. And it means so much more. And we have the ability to connect directly to these energies and to source. And it's never been more potent. So I hope that was insightful in some way. I'm very excited about life right now. I think this is just, we really have, it's hard. I call this pixelating. When you take a digital picture and all of the pixels and all the information flies around in complete chaos before it comes together again to form the new picture. And we're in a phase right now where we're super pixelating, and we don't really know whether we're coming or going, and being in our own cocoons, sort of isolated, separate together, alone together. We just have this amazing opportunity to let ourselves goop, to go through whatever personal process you need to go through, to crucify your old self and sprout your wings, turn into a butterfly, come into that Christ consciousness of compassion and understanding that everything affects everything, that the other person is you. And I look so forward to experiencing all of your stories in our new world, how we're going to live, and sharing mine with you.